integrative nutritionist at the Institute for Health and Healing. And today we're talking about spices and herbs. It's one of my very, very, very favorite subjects. I love spices and herbs. And I hope you're going to enjoy some of the ideas that I have for you too. But here's some information about them. So spices, it is considered to be the friend of physicians and the pride of cooks. And this goes back to Charlemagne, who was an 8th century king and conqueror. Even then, he was talking about it as being medicinal and plus very culinary. So the history behind herbs and spices is so fascinating. So let's look at some of this. Between the 8th and the 15th century, the spice trade was controlled by the Republic of Venice. It was a very wealthy republic. And the Arabs were the middlemen. They were guarding the sources and keeping the prices really, really, really high. In the 15th century, Portugal and Spain tried to break that monopoly. And this is when Christopher Columbus, who was looking for a new western route to the Spice Islands, inadvertently discovered the Americas. And in the following centuries, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the British colonized countries that were growing those spices. Of course they did. In the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company became the richest corporation in the world. And they pretty much monopolized the spice route. But after the 18th century, spices were started to be grown around the world in really large quantities. And it became a commodities in the world trade. And then in the 21st century, this whole explosion of what kind of spices could be grown for medicinal use became a huge, huge, major commodity. It was really the exploration for medicine. So if we think about turmeric and the curcumin in it and how it's been used for so many different health benefits and issues, right? So let's talk about some of the healthy benefits of spice, besides the yum factor, which is hugely important. So if we think of black pepper is considered to be the king of spices, and it's really good for digestion. It's antibacterial. And let me just explain one thing to you. You've heard me talk about phytochemicals, right? So phytochemicals are things that we find or molecules that we find in foods or plant foods specifically that really have a major impact on how we function. They're antimicrobial, they're antiviral, they're antibacterial, they repair our cells. They're important for how our DNA turns over. They're important for supporting our immune system, reducing inflammation. They're important from an epigenetic factor, meaning they turn on our healthy genes. They're important for the brain's function. We need them for the heart. We need them for the liver's function. We need them for cell repair, cell membrane repairs. So you can see we need those phytochemicals, right? So when we're talking about spices and herbs, they have high amounts of phytochemicals in them. And that's why they have all these incredible medicinal properties. So pepper was considered to be more valuable than gold. And how they found out that it was so amazingly antimicrobial was that there was some meat that was buried under some pepper leaves. And some months passed by, and somebody went to look for something and found that the pepper had preserved that meat. There was no bacteria or anything in them. But pepper is also very good because it stimulates the taste buds. It's very good for promoting digestive enzymes, and it tones the GI lining. The next thing we look at is black cumin. Black cumin, also known as nigella or collingy, was known as the cure-all. It has something in there called malathion, and it is required for so many different functions. Really has a high amount of phytochemicals in it. It's got 100 different phytochemicals in it. One of the others is Thio Thymoquinone, also known as just TQ. And this is one of the reasons why it has such a huge impact on our health. And in India, it's used as a condiment. So it gets ground onto food. So it's in a grinder like you would do pepper. It's a really, really, really great flavor, but it has absolutely no relation to cumin whatsoever. Anyway, cardamom is the queen. If we think of pepper as the king of spices, cardamom is the queen. It's known as the stomach sentinel. It's one of the most expensive spices, and the real true form of cardamom is green, and it's delicious. It's so lovely to put in coffee, even in some tea. You can use it both as sweet and as savory. I love cardamom. Chili is always interesting because it has capsicum in it, and capsicum is the phytochemical that reduces inflammation. I've talked about this often. There are different levels of heat in capsicum, and the highest right now is called the Carolina Reaper. And the Carolina Reaper is impossible to eat. But what they've done with this is they've grown this, or they've hybridized this particular chili to such a high capsicum level, because what they want to do is extract that capsicum and actually use it as a form of chemotherapy for some cancers. So medicinally, chili is really amazing for reducing pain. And you can find a lot of topical things too that you can put on arthritis or joint pain, that kind of stuff. But plus, it tastes so delicious. Cinnamon has been used for blood sugar and inflammation. And there are two different types of cinnamon. There's cassia, or there's Ceylon and Sri Lankan. Now, the cassia is the typical cinnamon we can buy off the shelves in any store in America. And then Ceylon and Sri Lankan is the true cinnamon. In my mind, it's a little bit too mild. I really like the strong flavor of the cassia. It's my preference. But cinnamon was used as an offering to the Greek and Roman gods. Moses was said to use cinnamon oil as a sacred anointing oil. And in the Indian and Chinese ancient cultures, cinnamon was definitely used medicinally. Saffron is considered to be the golden red threads, as brilliant as a summer sunset. It's the most expensive and exquisite of all the spices. It's also considered to be Mother Nature's Prozac. And dried stigma of blue crocuses is where it comes from. And it takes about 80,000 crocuses. And this is the actual stigma of the crocuses, but you need about 80,000 of them to actually produce a pound of saffron. That's why it's so expensive. But when you're buying saffron, don't buy cheap saffron, because otherwise you're just going to get filaments of turmeric. You want to make sure that you're getting the best form of saffron. Mostly saffron is picked by hand, and in family farms you will find in Iran or Kashmir or La Mancha in Spain. So coriander is the tamitema. It's the leaves of the plant, and the seeds. The leaves of the plant is cilantro and the seeds is coriander. So a combination of both of those has major impacts on our digestive system. Cumin, this is for inflammation and diabetes. It's one of the most used spice across many different cuisines. Lemongrass is considered to be calming and anti-inflammatory. And in fact, in places like Brazil, they'll use lemongrass steeped in warm milk, and it helps with reducing some anxiety too. Fenugreek is used for blood sugar, boosting testosterone, increasing milk production in pregnant women when it's required, and for reducing inflammation. Anise, definitely used for digestion, nausea, anti-inflammatory. It's lovely to chew one of those seeds after a meal. I love the flavor of anise. Caraway is really important for reflux, digestion, anti-inflammatory. And again, it's got that sort of licoricey flavor, which is good for the gut. Nutmeg has always been used for pain. Think about when they would use nutmeg for different functions in the body, but pain, for skin health, for inflammation, digestion, and brain function. And you only need a little bit of nutmeg. We think about nutmeg when we're thinking about stuff like Christmas holidays or even Thanksgiving, grating a bit of nutmeg on things like coffees or teas or other delicious celebratory beverages, right? Cloves are also major anti-inflammatory, antibacterial. And remember, in the olden days, they used to take clove and stick it on a sore tooth or inflamed gums. Sometimes people still do that now, and it helps to reduce the inflammation in the mouth. Mustard seeds also considered to be antibacterial and anti-inflammatory. And if we think about curries or garam masalas, mustard seeds is always included in either one of those combinations. Turmeric is anti-inflammatory. There's so much research around turmeric, and it's really the curcumin, of course, that's the important phytochemical that's used as an anti-inflammatory. I think we overuse it at times, but that's for another discussion. Ginger has been used for many centuries as a support for against nausea, helping with digestion and anti-inflammatory. Slicing slices of ginger and putting them in tea is always really helpful. So spices should always have the most vibrant and intense colors as possible. If your spices are starting to gray or you're buying spices that look a little off color, don't buy them because they've lost their potency and not that valuable. It's also important to note that spices should be used up. I mean, you should be using your spices within 6 months. They should not be saved. You don't want to be passing down spices to your children. If you've had spices in your spice cupboard for over 6 months, this would be a good time to replace them. And when you buy them, buy small amounts. Don't buy a whole bunch of them. Just a few would be really, really beneficial. And anytime you can use spices, you can season them with salt, you can use them when you're sauteing, when you're roasting vegetables, making a soup, a dip or a salad, and start low and be very adventurous around them. Start off with a half a teaspoon and see if that's the flavor you like. They're great with any food that you use. When you use spices, you want to temper them or bloom them, which means you fry the spices in a little bit of oil or fat, like maybe 2 tablespoons of ghee or butter or coconut oil or olive oil on low. You don't just want to add them to a liquid without blooming them or tempering them, because you want to pull the oils out of them. It's the oils that provide such a phenomenal flavor and, of course, all the medicinal functions of them as well. Whole spices are, of course, the best, and you want to roast and grind them. And if you can grind your own spices, that would be really, really, really beneficial. And you want to respect the short life of them. If they don't smell like anything, then the taste will be nothing too. So don't use them then. And if the recipe calls for a teaspoon of cumin seed and you've only got ground, you want to cut the quantity by about 25%. So 3/4 of a teaspoon for every 1 teaspoon would be an ideal ratio. So that's what we're going to talk about on spices. This could be a whole day's conversation because they're just so much fun to use. So let's talk about some herbs, right? And the herbs I'm going to talk to you about today are going to be things like rosemary and basil, arrowroot, dill, mint, oregano, marjoram, parsley, cilantro, did I say dill? Yes. And some arrowroot. All of these are important because they have the antiviral, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and they are so yummy and delicious. So sage, again, has those phytochemicals in them, and carnosic acid is one of the major phytochemical in this, and that is pretty much inflammatory. But traditionally, sage was associated with longevity. And it has a reputation for restoring failing memory in the elderly. And in fact, now they're looking at using sage, and specifically the phytochemicals of sage, for cognition, Alzheimer's, that kind of health issue. But one of the interesting things is it was said that when the British started importing tea from China, the Chinese so valued the herb sage that they would exchange 2 cases of tea for one case of dry English sage. I love those kinds of stories. But the herbs are really great because they're important for killing bacteria too. And actually, in the kitchen, you can pretty much use sage with so many different things. I know we traditionally just use it for Thanksgiving, but adding a couple of pinches of sage with some meat or some roasted vegetables would be great. Something like winter squash too. It's delicious. So rosemary, we all know rosemary, well, I hope you do. But traditionally, we think of rosemary when we're thinking about stuff like lamb. But rosemary can be used for many different functions. I love chopping up rosemary. The smell is so amazingly delicious. But one of its main functions is to reduce chronic inflammation. It's also an excellent tonic and a stimulant for the nervous system. So if you're going to cook something in oil, you might want to add some rosemary to the oil so it allows the antioxidants to help preserve the oil from oxidation. And if you're barbecuing or you're cooking any meat, you may want to marinate the meat in a bit of oil with some rosemary in it. Again, those phytochemicals really support and protect the meat before you actually cook them. The next one is basil. I add basil to practically everything I cook. Anything from eggs to vegetables to soups. And now that it's in season, it's delicious. It's very good as antiviral and reducing inflammation. It's also been used in digestive orders and now being studied for its anti-cancer properties. It's traditionally used in Italian cooking, but it's such a versatile herb. You can use it with anything. I actually, as we speak, have a lovely plant of herb growing on my windowsill in the kitchen because this is basil season, right? Tomatoes and basil, they go hand in hand with a lovely dollop of great olive oil, and life couldn't get any better than that. So using it in any form you like is a great idea. You can use it dried too. Just make sure that it hasn't been lying in your cupboard for a long time. So when we talk about basil, the other thing would be mint. It's a wonderful herb. It's used in many places of the world, probably not as common in the US, but it's traditionally been used to calm digestive issues, alleviate nausea. We talk about peppermint tea or spearmint tea, or even some of the oils for that. It's like lemon balm, oregano, and marjoram. It technically belongs to the mint family, but it's delicious to just chop that up, add that to a little bit of yogurt with some cucumber, and it's like a delicious tzatziki, and it's great to have on different forms of food. And you can have them on protein, you can have it with some vegetables. I love mint. The next one we're going to talk about is going to be dill. Very high antibacterial properties, and it's also known for stomach settling ability. It has a lot of nutrients, and it's quite delicious too. And again, it's got that sort of licoricey flavor, right? Nice to grind that up and put that on top of things like dips and dressings, or even add a couple of dill to omelets. And you can have the weed, and that goes really, really well with fish. You can just chop that up, or you can have it in the seed form. Oregano is another common ingredient, particularly used in Italian and Greek cuisine. And it's, as well as marjoram, by the way, both of those are very, very popular in Italy and Greece. But again, they are very high in antioxidants and antimicrobial properties. But they are delicious. So if you made a combination of even some dried basil and some marjoram, some thyme, rosemary, and even some sage, maybe even if you use a bit of cumin, some ground cumin, and you put that with some really great salt, it would be a phenomenal to add to some of your foods. Mix it up in maybe half a cup of Himalayan salt and added that to your foods would be absolutely delicious. Thyme is one of my favorite herbs. It contains thymol, and this is the phytochemical in there that's so important. You can use teas made with thyme, but I actually prefer to just sprinkle it on food, put it in a salad dressing, add it to olive oil. It's delicious. Parsley, many cultures use it to not only add flavor to dishes, but it's also for its very high nutrient value. It's a superfood. It's packed with essential oils, antioxidants, and tons of phytochemicals. And it benefits the bodies in many, many, many ways. It's originally native to central Mediterranean region, where even today it's still the highlight of many of the regional dishes. But we like to use it it gives color, it's vibrant, and then of course, it's very good for detox remedies, for diuretics, it's antiseptic, and it's anti-inflammatory. It's been used for ages, for centuries as that. Cilantro, another very popular Mediterranean, Mexican, Asian, and Indian herb. And it really gives a fresh boost of flavor. And it's also been used for detoxification of and elimination of heavy metals. It protects against oxidative stress, reduces anxiety, lowers blood sugar levels, supports heart, lowers cholesterol and triglycerides, prevents UTIs, soothes skin irritation, and it is yummy to put with different foods. So as you can see on the screen, here is a recipe for chamula. And chamula is one of my favorite things to use. It's got some coriander in it. It's got cumin. It's got paprika. It's got red peppers. It's got garlic in it. And it's got cilantro, parsley, and mint. And you could even add a tablespoon of fresh basil to this. But if you make up a pot of that and have it in your fridge, it's so delicious and it's really yummy to put on various foods. So that's that for today. Any questions? If you have any questions, you can put them you can send a chat. Oh yeah, the benefits of arrowroot. Thank you very much, Dr. Palanasamy. So arrowroot, one of the great things about arrowroot, it's considered to be a very starchy herb and it has amazing thickening abilities. So it's similar to cornstarch and it can be added to many dishes. I use arrowroot in my kitchen a lot for thickening everything. But it's also very good for the digestion. It's very soothing and it's often used for things like IBS, but it's a resistant starch, meaning that the gut bacteria can ferment that starch into short chain fatty acids, which are things or molecules that reduce inflammation throughout the body, but very good for the digestion. Any other questions?
I think Carissa asked the question, are there any spices or herbs we should avoid?
Oh, there's a question. Well, there can definitely be spices that some people have reactions to. Those would be the ones that I would say avoid. So If you have a problem with pepper, then you wouldn't add pepper to your foods. But mostly spices and herbs for most people would be very beneficial. And it's how you mix them up. You can combine them and make some phenomenal things like garam masala, some curry powders. The combination of those spices are hugely important. And another time we may talk about that too. But garam masala is a blend of ground spices, and it's used extensively in Indian cuisine. If we look at countries around the world, all of them have different spices that they use. That's what makes it so very exciting. We're using spices medicinally and from a yum factor. Okay. So one of the questions is about salt. I love different flavors of salt too. I think salt's important. I think it's given a really bad rap. I think most people need salt. If you're extremely stressed, salt is important. I think you need to have salt that has all the minerals and the nutrients in it. So none of the refined salt, because again, when we think about refined flours, we think about the nutrient deficiency in those foods. The same with salt. So Himalayan salt, some of the Celtic or the gray salt that still has all the minerals in are really, really important. Is iodine necessary in the salt? It has its place. However, most of the time you're going to find the refined salt with no iodine in it. Or you'll find just refined salt with iodine in it. No, I don't think it's that necessary, but the minerals are really important. Okay, folks, that's all we have for today. Thanks for joining. Take care and have a good week. Oh, and please don't forget to finish the survey. It's in the chat box. If you can complete that, that would be great. Thank you.